Hello once again. I'm in this video talking about misconceptions about translation and interpreting among students, about translators as well, teachers. The aim of this video and the other one is to try to talk about something that can be used in research and further research. And I'm talking about academic research. And I hope that interested people can find something useful here in order to choose a topic for their future investigation and exploration in the theory and practice of translation, interpreting, and teaching methodologies as well. Last time I talked about two misconceptions. The first one is the misconception or the perceived misconception that university does not teach us anything. This is by students. And the second one is that the second misconception is that only people who have a degree in translation can work as translators. And I talked about these two issues. Now, number three, the marketplace as a place where people can get information and knowledge from. There is a misconception among students that when they go to the marketplace, they can go there and have the opportunity to learn something in translation and about translation or interpreting. This can be true sometimes in specific cases, but in order to eliminate the misunderstanding, we have first of all to try to think about the marketplace. The marketplace has many translation companies or agencies, and they usually offer the jobs on the full-time basis or a freelance basis. You could also go there and work alone without any connection with any place or any company whatsoever. But I assume that some of the students, after graduation, they want to go to get some training, some actual training. Now here, this is the misconception. There is a very huge misconception concerning what this learning going to be. It's known in the literature that when you go to a person who is practicing a career and we want to learn the career, then you're following the mentorship model, the apprenticeship model, the mentor apprenticeship model, sorry. So the apprenticeship model is that you're going to be at the bottom of the ladder, and there is someone who's going to guide you up to the ladder or the career until you become a professional translator or interpreter. We have mismatches of expectations, to the best of my knowledge and experience again, when it comes to what the students expect and what the teachers expect or the mentors expect. It happened to me as a translation manager one day. I was translation training manager and used to receive dozens of students between the years 2008 until the year 2014 from universities, and all of them wanted to learn something, to practice translation. And I can affirm that the majority, or at least 90% of the students who used to come, had the misconception that when they come to the marketplace, they learn translation from the very beginning. That there's somebody who's going to teach them how to translate. While in fact, our expectation was totally different. The expectation from the marketplace, if I were a translation agency, is that I need somebody to help me with specific tasks, with translation maybe. And in the beginning, he can try to learn the things that I want to teach him in terms of how to deal with the clients, how to deliver the translation work in a way that is not going to cause any problems for me, and submit the work to the client. Now, this is the issue. Students do not understand this, and the mentors also do not understand that. I want just to talk about this in details because it is something that's really the biggest issue here when we talk about the apprenticeship model, in my experience at least. So let us talk about the things that I have noticed over the past 20 years. I remember 20 years ago, a translation agency talked to me. They wanted a student. They said to me, we want somebody who is able to write and read in English and Arabic. We do not want him to be of any experience in translation. Two companies talked to me in this way. And they said, he will come to us, we'll give him some work to do, and we will pay him. we will pay him. Although I don't remember exactly how much payment was there, but I think it was nominal payment, which is higher even, which was higher than the transportation fees. I do remember that. So in the beginning, 20 years ago, two agencies at least talked to me and said that they needed fresh graduates to work for them and to learn the practice of translation there. And they would pay for them. They would pay for them the nominal fees of transportation fees plus some kind of money. Things at the moment have changed. I don't know if it still exists, the practice still exists or not, although it seems to be it doesn't. It seems to be, I don't know. What happens at the moment, however, is that if you go to a translation company, there is a question, do you find a training place to be trained there? I don't have any data to verify this or to say, to confirm or not to confirm this, whether it's happening or not. However, from my understanding, there is a kind of misconception among both parties, the students and the workplace. Now, the issue is that there is no regulation, there is no code of conduct to delineate the responsibilities and rights of both parties, the student and the marketplace owner or the employer. And to the best of my knowledge, there is no contract between them. So when they go there to be recruited as a trainee, he is not signing any contract except in at least one company that does that, I remember. And we're talking about just large companies, big companies that do that. So the misconceptions. When I used to be the training manager, my understanding was that a student would come and he would be very professional, not in terms of the language competency, I mean, but at least to have some knowledge about English and Arabic, not to make any mistakes. And our idea was to give him or her real work. And they will do this work translated from English into Arabic or vice versa. There will be a translator, and the translator is going to revise this work by them, then submit it to the client. And from time to time, there would be certain hints or tips that the translator would directly give to the students. In 90% of the cases, nothing like this happened. 90% of the cases, students came without the adequate knowledge that would be required for us to follow this stream of thought, of training or apprenticeship. So we used to give them some actual work. They didn't know how to translate it. The results are amazing. So we had to do something else. And this would result in us giving them imaginary assignments that are not going to be delivered to clients. Now there is a problem with the feedback. Who is going to give feedback to the trainees? That was a problem because every translator, in any translation company, a translator is going to be paid for the work that he does. And there is a kind of specific number of pages or words that have to be translated every month. Otherwise, he will not be able to get his salary. So wasting time on the trainee is going to cut off the time, the productive time of the translator. That was one of the problems faced in the apprenticeship model. The apprenticeship model has a problem, yes, and this problem is based on mismatches between the expectations. The expectation of the employer who recruits the trainee seem to be totally different from those of the students or the fresh graduates. And here there is a problem. I suggest to have more research about these expectations, why they happen. But as a tip, this is outside the scope of research that I'm talking about. I really suggest to students to understand, first of all, what they want, to try to be reasonable and realistic in their expectations. And my suggestion to solve this problem from the marketplace was to categorize the tasks that can be done by a trainee. And I envisaged something called the Translator Assistant. And this Translator Assistant is one whose job is to assist the translator in his work. There would be tables, there would be diagrams, there would be simple tasks given to students or fresh graduates whose competence level is not as required for the translation of professional tasks. This is the kind of suggestion that I recommended, and you still need to make some research on that. Now, what is there another misconception? Number 4. There is a misconception by some students that I have heard. When they do their translation training or work, when I see their work in actual life, they would say that even if there are mistakes, it's okay, and the client has to understand that we are still beginners. This is a misconception if you have it as a student. Clients do not accept mistakes for one simple reason. From our work, from my experience with the clients, I know that the client, when he sends you the translation task, he believes or assumes that first of all you are doing it to the best of your competence and understanding and professionalism as well, but also he assumes that in one way or another you are delivering the work free of errors, even if that requires you to recruit a proofreader, for example. And the client, I assure you that the client requests that the translator is very careful concerning the accuracy of the terms, concerning the truthful reflection of what represents. And they are very picky about that. They wouldn't be happy with any mistake. They would suggest that you read the translation 4 or 5 times until you make sure that its quality is good. So if you think that when you go to the marketplace, the client would be lenient with you, if you make mistakes, then you're wrong. My experience, it happened to me personally about 15 years ago. I submitted a work to the client, and unfortunately, the first 3 words of mine in Arabic had typing mistakes. It was not only refused by the client, but it really received a very negative feedback. The client was very upset, and he told the outsourcer, this translation is very bad, and the translator is not paying any attention to it. And the client was very angry, I can say, I understand this. It's just because the first 3 words had typing mistakes. That's the only thing that he noticed. So he said that since there are 3 typing mistakes in the first 3 words, then I don't accept it. And I had to submit it free of charge after correcting these words, unfortunately for me. Misconception number 5. Number 5. When you follow the apprenticeship model, is the mentor responsible for the grammar mistake that you make? The answer is, from my experience, no. The translator who's going to mentor you doesn't have necessarily the knowledge of how to teach you grammar. He doesn't have necessarily have any teaching skills. He doesn't necessarily have methodologies to teach you translation even. What he does is to tell you what he is doing and how he does things so that you can imitate him if you like, if you take him as a model. And that's all. So he doesn't correct your grammar mistakes. He is not going to be interested in your grammar performance in terms of making it better, I mean. So from my experience, the mentor is not going to be happy with you if you make a grammar mistake, because he would say, I cannot correct you this grammar to you. I have to teach you how to deal with the client. I have to teach you how to search for the terms. I have to teach you how to form your own glossaries. There are some technicalities of the business, so to speak, that you have to learn. This is something that he can tell you, because it's like a science in his mind. He knows exactly what the client hates, what the client likes. He knows exactly where to look for mistakes when there is proofreading, for example, to look for the typing mistakes, for even the grammar mistakes and other things. But he's not going to be responsible for you to give him your work full of grammar mistake and say, please correct them for me. He's not going to be responsible for this. Now, translation is easier than interpreting. This is number 6. This is probably a misconception by some students. And I can say to you that translation is easier than interpreting. This is not quite correct. It all depends on you, on your individual skills. If you have the skills to interpret, then you can interpret. If you have the skills to translate, you can translate. But I can tell you something. In actual work, when I go to a conference, even if I make mistakes in the conference, in simultaneous interpreting, at the end of the day, if they understand that the communicative event is achieved correctly, everybody understands what the other says, there's no problem. They are very happy with my interpretation. I go back and I'm very happy. It's going to be very easy for me. Translation, however, when you translate something in writing, what happens is that it goes to the client, and the client revises it. He finds the problems. He goes back to you. The proofreader is not happy. The client is not happy. The outsourcer is not happy. You have to correct. You have to change. Now, this is the problem that you have to face in written translation. Of course, it has to do with your competence, but at the same time, think about it. The pressures on the written translation task are much higher than the pressures on the simultaneous interpreting, provided that you have the skills there. So for me, personally speaking, I already have the interpretation skills and I already have the translation skills. I wouldn't think of working as a written translator if I have the chance to work as a simultaneous interpreter. This is the feeling that I have, and this feeling is supported by the fact that simultaneous interpreting, even if you make a mistake or two or whatsoever, slip of the tongue, we call it, provided that you do your work professionally, then nobody is going to blame you for these small mistakes. They understand and say it's not a problem. On the other hand, if you work as a written translator, no, if there is any simple word that has a typing mistake or whatsoever, something that has to be rewritten, rephrased, then you are going to be in a problem. You have to revise something. There would be lots of pressure. The question also raises the issue about the competence. Do translators have the competence necessary for interpretation and vice versa? It's very hard to say whether they are really related or not. From my experience, I have seen several interpreters who did not have a degree in translation, who do not know how to translate in writing, but they are skillful in interpreting between English and Arabic, to the best of their knowledge at least, or to the major conferences that they are involved in. Probably, I'm not sure, probably if they are in more specialized conferences, they will not be able to do their job professionally. Probably, there's no clue for me to say whether this is confirmed or not. But at least in written translation, they really do not have the competence for translating any word. I know many people of them, and still they work as simultaneous interpreters. This brings us to another question. Is consecutive interpretation easier than simultaneous interpreting? Once again, from my experience, it's all highly subjective issue. Some people whom I know believe that simultaneous interpreting is much more difficult, and they have their reasons to say that. Other people would say they feel happier with consecutive interpreting. Some interpreters would say that consecutive interpreting is much memory depleting. Other people would say that simultaneous interpreting is the one that really challenges your mind because you cannot talk and speak at the same time or in semi-real time. Well, basically, we cannot say even that a person who is a simultaneous interpreter can do consecutive interpreting. We cannot say that a person who can do consecutive interpreting is going to be able to do simultaneous interpreting. They are not related. This is something that I'm sure of out of experience and knowledge as well. And based on my interaction and talk with dozens of interpreters, we've got this result from their perception. So the perception of the interpreters, at least of Jordan, people whom I work with, is that it's not necessarily to have both skills related together. And remember that you may hear people saying something different from what I say to you, but remember that this is going to be a prejudice as well. And I'm telling you that this is what I hear. If they tell you about something that they hear in another different way, it's another way to talk about it. It's their perception. I'm not going to interfere in that. But anyway, this is why we say we need some kind of research to understand the issues of consecutive interpreting and simultaneous interpreting, why people prefer this to that or the vice versa. I don't know, at least in my case, I prefer simultaneous interpreting. At least in my case, I hear people say that they prefer simultaneous interpreting because they are very skillful in it and they don't like consecutive interpreting for the other problems, maybe social, maybe they don't like to face people, some of them told me. And most importantly, we don't have a regulation or code of conduct on how to deliver simultaneous interpreting or consecutive interpreting. Consecutive interpreting, do you facilitate the meeting and add words as you want? Do you explain, or do you start being like formal interpreter? We don't have a code of conduct for that. Probably this explains why there are some discrepancies among interpreters themselves about that. Some people would say we don't have the ability to speak and listen at the same time, and they run into the prejudice of saying consecutive interpreting is much more difficult and simultaneous interpreting is easy. But this way of talking, unfortunately, it is because they are afraid that people would otherwise underestimate their skills, and they would say, if you translate as a consecutive interpreter, then you are nothing. We don't recognize you as an interpreter. So there's a kind of prestige or status. This is what pushes many people to say that consecutive interpreting is much more difficult than simultaneous interpreting. And I have seen many people like that. Otherwise, I wouldn't have said this point of view. But I have seen many people who fear their status for that reason would say that simultaneous interpreting is more difficult, or otherwise consecutive interpreting is more difficult. It depends on their own skills. If they are more skillful in simultaneous, they would say this is the most difficult. If they are more skillful in consecutive, they would say consecutive is more difficult. We do not have any kind of examination or assessment on the national level in the Arab world for interpreters, to the best of my knowledge again, and according to the research, by the way. So I think this is a very good area of discussion to discuss it, to see how things can be improved in this area, so that at least if there is consecutive interpreters, at least they are going to do the act in a way that would lead them at least to understand what they are doing. So status again, in fact, makes people say that written translation is more important than simultaneous interpreting, or the vice versa. It depends on the skill. It depends on whether you have it or not. In my experience, an interpreter would be in a position where he doesn't like an ex-interpreter, and he knows that the ex-interpreter doesn't know how to do written translation. He would make the judgment that a simultaneous interpreter cannot interpret if it is not a translator from the very beginning, vice versa. A person who is written translation, who doesn't do the simultaneous interpreting, he would say that a person who is doing simultaneous interpreting and not written translation, he would say that this is the most difficult job. And I heard it many times. They would say that simultaneous interpreting is the most challenging one after being an astronaut. This is what they say. This is what we have now. Fatima is asking a question: is it necessary to become expert or professional at editorial written translation before becoming simultaneous interpreter? Not translation, interpreting, I mean. Well, this is what I am talking at the moment, and unfortunately, we do not have any framework to answer this question. And the only way is to have some kind of introspection, to ask questions to the interpreters and to try to understand it. For me, if you ask me, I would reflect on my own experience and my own privileges and would say that written translation has given me a lot of things. Written translation has awakened my mind and made me more aware about what's happening around me. It's made me a better reader and a better person to understand and read, a wiser maybe. But does that affect my being an interpreter? I cannot have any link between them. I do not have any link or connection between them. There is a colleague whom I met one day, and she insisted also the same thing. She said that translation is civilization. Translation is something that has to be considered as translation proper. But interpretation, she said, this is just interpretation. It is not an art of translation. It's what she says, to the best of my knowledge. And there is still another person whom I heard one day. He was an outsourcer, and he said to me, Mohammed, look, our job is interpreter. An interpreter is yufassir. In other words, in Arabic, it's explainer. He's not a translator. And that's why we insist on talking about the prestige and the status of translators and interpreters. Unfortunately, little research is done on that, how people perceive the status that they have and how this status affects their own conceptions or misconceptions about translation and interpreting. Fatima, you mean translator, not well, Fatima, you have either simultaneous interpreting or written translation, but you do not have both simultaneous translation unless you're talking about visual translation. This is another issue altogether. Now we move to finally we have the seventh. There is a seventh misconception that I want to talk about, and then I will add another misconception. Great misconception is number 8, but anyway, number 7. Number 7 says that translation companies give training free of charge. Now, back to the issue that I raised from the very beginning, when I remembered 2 translation companies 20 years ago in the year 2000, 1999, 2000, that asked me to nominate some people to go there and to start working for them. And he said that in the first few months there will be training. We will give them nominal amount of money, or pocket money they call it, or to give them transportation fees plus minus. That was about 20 years ago. I'm not sure about what's happening at the moment, but anyway, it is a misconception at the moment to assume for granted that translation companies can deliver training for free. This is untrue for 2 reasons. The first one is that there is no regulation that would offer that. Unlike lawyers or engineers whatsoever, those people who have the regulations to bind some companies to give training free of charge and to pay the trainees and novices nominal amounts of money in their training. However, in translation, we do not have such regulations. Therefore, there is no obligation on any company to do that. So companies most likely, this is my own perception, work for their own benefit. They want to make money at the end of the day. You come there, they try to give you your work and to see what kind of benefit you can do. It happened to me in one of the companies that I work for. As I said, I received once many students. Many of them, in fact, were very excellent at the very beginning. So we gave them the work free of charge. They did that as training. And then when we realized that they were doing a very good job and it did not need any kind of proofreading even, I suggested that they move to the pool of translators and they were given real work. By the way, all the work was real. And then I remember that we started paying to them. This is something that I remember. In another instance, we remember a trainee that was trained. And after a few months of training, we thought that he could be useful. So we gave him assignments and we made revisions. So he was given some money for his work, but not the money that is given to the translator. Now, so it has to do with how much benefit a company gets out of the training of a novice or whatsoever. If he is going to be just a burden, I don't think that they will pay. On the contrary, they will ask him to pay money, as happens in many cases when the company starts to make a department for. Some companies start to make a kind of department, especially for training, and they would just deliver training courses on their own. Now, that's number 7. So do not expect a freelance to give you a free of charge training. Do not expect any company to give you any free of charge training. There's nothing like that. Nothing like that. Finally, I have just one final misconception that hope it's going to conclude this 2-episode videos, and it is about literal translation. It is a misconception among some clients, some students, some even trainers, some whatsoever, that any bad quality, low quality translation is literal. And there is unfortunately the judgment that they say your work is too literal. This is a misconception for one reason. Literal translation is a strategy. It is not a mistake. It is a strategy. But the mistake is that when you apply literal translation in the wrong way, then this is a mistake. So instead of saying to the translator, your translation is literal, this is bad, you have to say to him, it is not good that you have used literal translation in this specific context. You can say that if you like. Much of the client's feedback revolves around the issue that we hear from them. Sometimes I heard it from one client who gave me a work for proofreading. He said the translator translated that, and she said to me, I do not feel it is Arabic. So this is one of the common feedback, negative feedbacks that you can hear from clients. And they say that this needs revision. This needs more, it doesn't flow. It's not smooth. You feel it's a translation. In some cases, yes, there would be clients who are very prejudiced, and he would say, this is a literal translation, and this is a Google translation, this is a machine translation. You can hear that. If you hear that, this is highly prejudiced, and this is a term used in the marketplace. Unfortunately, a long time ago, Francis Bacon also already told us about this problem, the ideal of the marketplace. But in fact, what they talk about is totally different from we understand. They say it is too literal. We understand that they don't want literal translation, which is wrong. When they say it is too literal, they have other meanings. It means that it's not flowing naturally in the target language. This is what they mean usually. How we understand that is from dealing with them, from seeing their prejudices, from even being prevented from discussing with them these prejudices. I came to the conclusion on multiple occasions with people that clients simply sometimes do not want to understand that even the terms that they are using are not correct. However, the majority of clients that I have worked for do not have this attitude. They wouldn't say, this is too literal, this is less literal. They simply would say that, could you please revise this? Could you please revise that? We do not feel this works for us. It's something like more polite like this. And again, unfortunately, we do not have a code of conduct to bind the clients on a way that they can talk to the translators in a way that avoids the jargon of the marketplace. In other words, the ideal of the marketplace, to put it in Francis Bacon's term. So this is another thing. So we cannot say to any person, this is too literal, this is wrong. It's wrong to say this is too literal, but it's correct to say you use a form of translation that's not consistent with the goal of this translation, with the goal of this brief that we gave you, something like this. And there must be some kind of corrections that have to be given to them. Now, finally, I think I have come to a conclusion. I hope that these 2 videos are going to be helpful for any person who would like to engage in research, in actual research, whether it's empirical research or action research or whatsoever, in translation, to try to figure out why these misconceptions happen and what kind of truth that you can inject instead of these misconceptions, and how can you make changes in the arena of training of translators and interpreters as well. Thank you very much for watching. Have a good day, and bye-bye for now.